Thank you, Nick, and kudos for having a crack at the Shakajawanan project name. For those of you that might be wondering how we ended up with such a mouthful, let me explain a little bit of background. I work on the principle that we've all got used to saying Saskatchewan. I think Saskatchewan is something that we've all become used to, so Shakajawanan, we'll get used to that one too. Climbing a hill or hills is in fact the meaning behind Shakajawanan. The Cree First Nations named our project, and we're very proud to take on that name as part of our future. When you're in the lithium market, it might feel like you're climbing a few hills or mountains too. I can tell you that much for free. What am I going to talk about today? Well, at Patriot, we have one of the great hard rock projects globally. I'm going to share a few thoughts about why we believe it's one of the more important projects globally, and tell you a little bit about our recent preliminary economic analysis just released in the last couple of weeks, a resource upgrade, and it goes some way to explaining why we think it's one of those really important projects globally. But of course, the lithium world is also confusing, I'm sure, from an investment point of view. So I'm really keen today to share a few thoughts about the shape of the market and the way we see the lithium world unfolding, and for that matter, how you might actually take advantage of some of that volatility. So let's get stuck into it. At Shakajawanan, we've got one of the big ones. So it was only discovered in late 2021, but in the last 3 years, it's already become the largest hard rock resource in the Americas and one of the top 5 globally. And why does that happen? Well, it happens because it is absolutely amazing geology. And that was the main reason that I got involved at Patriot post my time with Pilbara Minerals. I was sitting there doing my due diligence over the kitchen table, I'm a mining engineer, but looking at the geological maps and thinking, I'm having flashbacks back to doing the same job when I joined Pilbara Minerals in 2015. It was a case of deja vu. And I've got to say, I got a really good feeling about it and thought, no, I've definitely got to get involved. This is one of the great ones. And fortunately, the drilling that we've done to date in Quebec has proved as much. An amazing resource that is going to continue to grow as we keep drilling, and subsets of that resource are unbelievably high grade. And that's another theme that I'm going to keep coming back to you as I present this morning. So it's one of the big ones based on the premise that it's a really amazing geology, and therefore we're working really hard to continue to progress the project. So that manifests itself just recently in the presentation of our PEA, or in Australian terms, the scoping study. And what we've outlined is the development case for a very large hard rock mine in Quebec, central Quebec, James Bay region. It's north, but not very far north, roughly equivalent to London, actually, if anybody's wondering. It's not as though we're in the Arctic Circle. And we've outlined a case for the staged development of the Shakajawanan project. Now here, we're not reinventing the wheel. This is a little bit like Pilbara Minerals, Mark II. Building stage 1 at 400,000 tonnes per annum of spodumene concentrate, and using the cash flow from stage 1 to build stage 2 to become an 800,000 tonne per annum spodumene concentrate project. Now, to put that in context, it's easy to say. To put that in context, today that would be the world's second largest hard rock lithium mine, Greenbushes being the largest. By the time we see Shakajawanan being in production, it's likely to be in the top 4. So it's a big play, and it's an important play being based in Quebec for the future growth coming in North American and European markets. That's the main game for Patriot and our project. We're not a project that's principally going to be built for delivery to China. We're going to leave that to the West Australians. We're going to work in the Western Australia of Canada, being Quebec. And this is another important point to think about, because a lot of people fear development in Canada. Some might argue it has a reasonably checkered past with respect to the approval of mines, but that's not true in Quebec. Quebec is like a French-speaking WA. It's got all the hallmarks of a great mining jurisdiction. A diverse mining economy, the regulatory environment is solid in the same way it is in Western Australia, and the First Nations engagement is very, very clear. In fact, it's better than in Australia in the James Bay region, because the Cree Nation have signed a treaty with the province of Quebec, and it gives and establishes incredibly clear land use principles. That's what's really good for industry like ours, the mining industry and development in the north, because you have one First Nation. There is no competing claims. They are at the table with you for the progress of your project and its approval. They're not held at arm's length like they are in Australia, the First Nations here under native title. They're actually at the table with you, working on your project. It's a really fantastic jurisdiction for development, and that's why we're confident in the progress of our project over the coming couple of years. Within the PEA itself, it outlines a really, really compelling development case. Competitive CapEx, ultra-competitive operating costs, and mainly as a function of the combination of scale and grade, low cost of power. All those things contribute to really competitive operating costs. But the main thing is the grade. And this is where I want to draw a distinction for you that might help explain sort of part of our development strategy. So when we think about the development of Shagajawanan, we think about a large-scale project that's going to underwrite, a big project that's going to underwrite for multiple decades, new supply chains in North America and Europe. So that's the base case. But within the Shagajawanan resource, you have areas of very, very high grade. So I'm going to highlight the Nova zone. Here we're looking at a long section. That's the picture there in red. And don't let the scale fool you. That's 4.6 kilometres long. And inside that great big long cigar that's represented by our CV5 resource is a subset. It's a cigar within a cigar. And that is 22 million tonnes of about 80 million tonnes, 22 million tonnes, that is 2.1% lithia, diluted, ready to mine. Now, the only other mine that has anything like that globally is Greenbushes. So it's one of the great ones. And it creates this really defensive environment for the development of a mine in almost any lithium market that you could possibly imagine, because you have the benefit of this incredibly high grade. In our PEA proposal, we've highlighted the development sequence that includes part underground mining and part open pit mining to access the ore body, but especially to use the underground to target the high-grade Nova zone. So this is a really important part of our future. But it doesn't stop there, because as we keep drilling, we're discovering more high grade. So in the latter part of our winter program, so this is going back to, of course, the northern winter, going back to earlier in the year, in our last couple of holes, we've tripped over the Vega zone. The Vega zone is another high-grade target or discovery, but it's a target now because we expect it to grow. So it's new, it's another area of our Shagajawanan project, and it's also high grade. So we're going to continue to follow that up, and that'll be part of a future development scenario. So these opportunities are going to keep coming because of the fantastic geology that I've described. So a lot about what's to be developed at Shagajawanan is easy. It's easier than most hard rock mines. And that's motivated by the way the spodumene presents in the ground. Very, very large spodumene crystals, decimetre, metre scale crystals, but they're all like that. They're all large. And what that allows is the deployment of just dense media separation for lithium recovery. You don't need flotation. And flotation was what gave me a lot of grey hair at Pilgangoora and at Pilbara Minerals. It's hard work and it's more art than science, whereas DMS is in the scheme of things, is a much simpler processing technology to recover the concentrates. In terms of mine development and the sequence from here, we're into our third season of environmental study, and we'll present our environmental documentation with the final feasibility study in the September quarter of next year. Having presented those two key documents, feasibility and environmental documents, to COMEX, a joint approval between the Cree Nation and the province of Quebec, 2 years later, we expect our mine approval to come through and construction to commence. That allows commissioning in the latter part of 2028 and full-scale production from 2029. Now, when you think about it, there's not many places around the world where you can get a mine approval in 2 years. That's what Quebec has to offer, and that's why it's one of the great mining jurisdictions globally. Okay, moving on to markets. At least today, it's all about China. China's the main source of lithium raw material demand, and that's very much been the story for the last decade or so. What do? They behave in some unusual ways, and that's what's inspired this most recent bout of volatility. They've been very successful in defending a position around having to pay $8,000 a tonne for their spodumene or $80,000 a tonne for the lithium chemicals by inspiring new sources of lithium raw material supply, a lot of it from Africa. But what I want to tell you is, do not believe what the Chinese tell you about the cost of those operations. There is no doubt in my mind that they are at the higher end of the cost curve. And if you're looking for evidence as to what the structure of the market looks like today, imagine a situation where, of course, spodumene has now come off its almighty highs down to, let's say, $750 a tonne. West Australian spodumene, the higher quality product globally, has not slowed down. It hasn't slowed down in the slightest, hasn't moved. Those tonnes are continuing to be shipped to China and to Korea. Where have the tonnes fallen out of the market? They've fallen out domestically in China and from Africa because they are the higher cost of supply. Now, why am I telling you that? That's because China's response was to develop low-quality resources, low-grade, high-cost. They are a flash in the pan. They don't survive the market for the long term. And that's why we can, at least in part on the supply side, rely on the higher quality mines to make money through the cycle. So that's the supply side. Now, demand is equally important. And this is where there's been an underestimation, I think, in Western world analysis as to where the lithium market is headed. The first point to make is how quickly China is changing the cost of the batteries themselves. Lithium iron phosphate cells are China's lithium ion battery of choice. So that's the one that they've really targeted. And they've built huge amounts of capacity. A lot of that capacity sits idle. It's being underutilised today. At the same time, the cell costs have halved in the last 12 months. They've gone from $100 a kilowatt hour to $50 a kilowatt hour. A combination of their margins being squeezed as they penetrate new markets, lower raw material costs, and of course, economies of scale. The reason that's important is because as the cells become cheaper, they grow the addressable market. More EVs, more buses, more trucks, more static energy storage being filled with lithium iron phosphate batteries. So the next demand shock comes from China when they switch on the balance of their lithium iron phosphate battery making capacity. It's just waiting there to be switched on. When it gets switched on, There is not enough lithium raw material supply, and that's where the next price run comes from in the lithium world. Last point, cars themselves. In China, it's already cheaper to buy an EV than it is to buy an internal combustion engine car. It has been for about the last 18 months. And that same phenomenon has just happened in the US. It's now cheaper to lease an EV in the US than it is to drive the equivalent internal combustion engine car. And again, this is being underestimated by, I think, Western analysts as to where the average consumer goes in the coming years. They're going to want to buy an EV because it's materially cheaper. And it's materially cheaper because the cell costs are becoming cheaper than anyone would have ever estimated just a couple of years ago. So this is why, on the demand side, you know, it's important, and I think a key driver for where the market goes to from here. North America and Europe, they're the next big demand growth sectors. So China was the last decade. It's all about North America and Europe in the next decade. And that's why our Shakajuanan project is such an important one for North American and European markets. And I've used up all my time. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. Really appreciate it.